Perhaps you noticed that the story of the cleansing of the temple in John occurs not at the end of Jesus' ministry where most of us want to place it, but it occurs at the beginning. And I saw that and panicked. But the commentators comforted me when they said, don't worry about when it happened. That's not the point. The point is that it happened, and when it happened is irrelevant. So what we observe in the story is that Jesus has entered Jerusalem, and we find him at the temple. And we understand that the people who are gathered there to worship on the Passover are required to be there by law. They really don't have a choice. All of what happens is prescribed by law. They're to make sacrifices, they're to be unblemished. Obviously, many of them cannot get animals from home, and they remain unblemished. And so they have to purchase the animals there at the temple. And all of this, it seems, has been set up in what's called the court of the Gentiles, which is the outside part of the temple. And Jesus has been around and he has observed that there are tables with money changers, because most of the people who have coins have Roman coins with the hated images of Caesar. And those are not acceptable in the temple. So they have to change the money. And so these money changers are very glad to change the money for a fee. One of the commentators referred to price gouging. Now, many of the people were poor, and they really could not afford that. It was a form of oppression. And so I can imagine that there were some people who simply could not worship because they could not afford the fees in order to get the appropriate unblemished animals. It's kind of like back in the early 60s. I forget the exact year. 1961, 1962, I was something like a sophomore, junior in high school. And I went to the, as was my custom, I went with my family to the First Baptist Church of Bainbridge, Georgia. The church that had ordained me, and they had baptized me and later ordained me. And I got there and discovered that there was going to be a vote taken that day. I didn't know anything about it in advance. I suspect my parents did, but they hadn't told me that we were going to be taking a vote. And never mind that, and I was Southern Baptist at the time, and yes, I had memorized the Great Commission, go ye therefore unto all nations. Georgia Baptist of the Southern Baptist Convention owned Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. And this was in the early 60s, the height of the Civil Rights Movement. And Georgia Baptists were going to vote on whether or not African Americans would be permitted to matriculate at our Mercer University. And I knew that this was not right to take that vote. But the vote was taken, and it was overwhelmingly across the state of Georgia, no. Well, just as Jesus knew that a change needed to be made in the temple, I knew that a change needed to be made at church. Of course, I was only something like 16 years old, and I had to wait for earning a bit more clout. But this morning, I would like for us to focus on the scripture in John and look at this story in terms of our emerging into a transformative age of the Spirit and religion, where we learn to cleanse the temple and to renew the church for the people. Because the church is for the people, not the other way around. And I will be following an outline that has been produced by Harvey Cox, in which he talks about three ages: the age of faith and belief and spirit, that takes place through history. Harvey Cox made himself famous back in the 60s writing a book, The Secular City, and he is still at his analysis of our culture. His approach is akin to Phyllis Tickle, who talks about the same period, but says that every 500 years there is a major shift in what happens in the world of religion. And most recently, she is also a Baptist, or at least she died 2 years ago, but we're talking about two Baptists here. But we've had an Episcopalian who has joined the discussion down in Butler Bass, who talks about 4 awakenings in this country, and we are entering the 4th awakening. And they all come out that beginning in about 1960, we have entered the age of the Spirit. And it's taken me a while to figure out what that's all about. But when Jesus entered the temple and cleansed it, this was kind of at the beginning of the entry into what Harvey Cox calls the age of faith. But not only did Jesus cleanse the temple, we're told in the Gospel of Mark that when the powers that be heard about what he had done, that they continued to figure out how they were going to kill him. So Jesus goes in and he cleans up the marketplace. He goes in and he weaves some a whip. Now, I've always had a picture of a strap of leather with metal in it. Well, that's not the case. He took some of the things like palm branches and simply had something to shoo out the animals. He overturned the tables and said, "Get all of this out of here. You are making my house a marketplace." What he did was literally liberate the worshipers so that they could come and worship without being oppressed. The temple is for the people. Now, I don't think Jesus actually cleaned things up permanently. I think it probably continued to go the way things were, but I think his followers got the point, because the first time we see an expression of the church is in the 2nd chapter of Acts, where the folks are worshiping in houses. They own everything in common. They're selling their possessions, and they're taking care of the needs of all the people. They got the message. The place of worship is for the people. Now, the next stage is the age of belief. And that came into being around the 4th century at the Council of Nicaea, where everybody was beginning to ask, exactly what's the relationship between God and Jesus? Before that, they were simply known as the Way. They were followers. They simply did what they thought Jesus would do. They didn't worry about all this theology. But things began to change, because we were beginning to get people high up in a hierarchy, and they had to be right. And so they formed the Council of Nicaea during the time of Constantine. That age lasted until about 1960. So on that Sunday morning, that fateful Sunday morning, when I stepped into my home church and witnessed that vote and knew something was wrong and that there needed to be a change, I began to envision a church that was racially integrated. That was my vision. I didn't realize that that was not something just taking place with me, but that was beginning to happen all over the place. It took me nearly 50 years to figure that out. Well, I graduated from high school, went to college, got involved in the Baptist Student Union at Auburn. Yes, the Auburn that plays Alabama in the Iron Bowl every November. The Alabama where my mother graduated from college. And I'm not going to get into football this morning. We can discuss that later. Only to say that I'm beginning to become concerned about the violent attitudes I'm experiencing every fall. But I'll work on that. We can work on that, Aaron, when we get alternatives to violence going. In college, I began to talk to people about coming to church, being a part of the Baptist Student Union. And I began to hear people say, I don't want anything to do with church. The church is not relevant. That was our question. Is the church relevant? I didn't think it was very relevant at the time. I was getting ready to change it, you see. But I had read the Bible and knew that Jesus had addressed social concerns, and so I committed myself to being a part of the church and a part of religion. And then I went on to seminary in Louisville, and I discovered a church in Louisville, one of two churches in the old Southern Baptist Convention that was racially integrated. I was stunned to find it. But I began to find myself in a place that was not only sensitive to race. Eventually, when the pastor left, I got on the pastor search committee, and we called a husband and wife pastor team. Now, there was some other controversy going on, I understand, and we kind of got away with it for 10 years until the denomination eventually choked it. But we had a very creative church going on in the inner city or the west end of Louisville. I remember sitting in a pastoral care class one day at the seminary under Dr. Wade Royd, and the conversation kind of got over to women deacons, and that was controversial in the old Southern Baptist Convention because Southern Baptists ordained deacons, and you couldn't ordain a woman. Anyway, Dr. Royd raised a question in this class of about 40 classmates. How many of you go to churches with women deacons? I was one of 3 that raised a hand. Now, Dr. Royd knew exactly where I went to church. So he looked at me and said, well, Joe, is she black or white? The classroom went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. And I said, well, Dr. Royd, she's black, but her husband's white. There was a gasp. The room got even quieter until I heard somebody mutter in the back of the room, what kind of church does he go to? Well, I'm going to tell you this morning, I was going to a church where we were allowing Jesus to cleanse us of our prejudices. I still hadn't caught on that I was a part of a new age, but that's what happened. Then I graduated and went to serve a church. I was called to the staff of a church in a large city in Georgia. And I realized that this whole social action and evangelism thing was coming back to haunt me. When I got to seminary, you had to choose evangelism or social action. Well, my seminary had a social work school that I was destined to be a part of, and so that choice was made for me. But now I was in a church where I had been hired to go out and visit people to get folks to come and join our church. See, we were in the Bible Belt, and we had dropped as a downtown church to 800 members, only 800 members. And we had to reestablish our financial base, see the marketplace again. Never mind, we had low-income housing across the street where people were living on welfare. We weren't concerned about them. And as I visited the church, I began to discover that there were members who were attenders, who were members but not attenders. And as I would ask them why they didn't attend, well, I just can't believe some of that stuff anymore. And I tried to convince them that there's options, but to no avail. Then 1960 arrives, and we enter what is being called the age of the Spirit. And that's where we are, and we don't know when it's going to end, because everybody is saying this is not a passing fad. This is something major. It has the status of the Protestant Reformation. It has the status of the Great Schism. It is major, and we are all caught up with it. And we're living in an age where we're hearing people say, I am spiritual, but not religious. That means they want to have some experience with the divine, but not with the church. And I had not realized that I fit kind of in that camp. Spirituality is experiencing the divine. It's not believing in the divine. You have an experience without getting caught up in the theology. And so what we have today is people are either leaving the church or they are not joining the church. The largest group in these polls are the nuns. And I'm not talking about Catholic women who become a part of the convent. I'm talking about folks who don't go to church of all descriptions. Simply said, the church, religion, today is failing. It's my understanding that our denominational base in Valley Forge, affectionately known as the Holy Donut, has recently been sold. That is happening to all denominations. We are losing. Even the mighty Southern Baptist Convention, we're told, is slipping. It's happening to all of us. You and I, we showed up this morning. We are part of that category known as spiritual and religious. Spiritual and religious. Well, some of us are progressive in our theological beliefs. Some of us have developed some alternative spiritual experience, like the alternatives to violence. I get more of my spirituality out there than I do in here. That's who I am. And some of us are transitioning in our religious fellowship. We're finding other ways to do it. So, we find ourselves spiritual and religious in a time of spiritual but not religious. What are we going to do about it? to do. Dinah Butler Bass gives us 4 P's. The first P is prepare. Prepare. We need to do our homework. We need to become informed so that we thoroughly understand what is happening. We are dealing with a phenomenon of big proportions. This is not something that's going to go away. This is for keeps. The church is changing. Bishop Spong wrote a book, Why Christianity Must Change or Die. It's not going back. We need to understand, if we're going to be religious, how do we do spirituality with a group of folks who increasingly want to be spiritual but not religious? The second P is practice. Practice. She said we need to learn to do some new kinds of disciplines. Chances are in Cincinnati, if I'm not up here on Sunday and there's no American Baptist churches that I fit in and there's no Alliance of Baptist churches, period, I'm probably worshiping with the Quakers. They do spirituality different. They're kind of kin to the Baptists. But we need to expand our spirituality. The third P is play. We need to have fun. Now, I'm not good at that. My daughter is a banged-up person to have fun. If we want to have a party in our family, we get Angela to have the party. I'm too serious for that. But we need to learn to have fun. In the AVP program, we run workshops for 12 hours a day, come back for another 12 hours, it gets tense. And so we have what we call light and livelies. These are exercises where we have fun and play games and release tension. And we need to learn how to play because we are not winning, folks. The church is not winning. And the fourth P is participate. This means we need to learn how to become involved in new ways that's inclusive of all people. So what would this look like at University Baptist Church? Well, we could read and study books about the phenomenon, do our homework. We could ask people who are not part of our fellowship, what do you really need for your spirituality? I think perhaps we might decide to go on a vision quest. I talked about that last Sunday. A vision quest where we take the data that we receive and process it, and we come up with a game plan, a vision statement. We need to really take seriously what we're dealing with. Find ways to expand our fellowship. Used to, churches I went to had a weekly supper on Wednesday night. Now we get too busy, that doesn't work. I see that a lot of churches are having potlucks on Sunday. Finding ways to get out as a group and see each other during the week. I grew up in a small town. We saw each other constantly. In cities, we don't see each other except on Sunday. So how do we address the fellowship, having times that we get to know each other? I'll be honest, when I come here on Sunday, I drive 100 miles. It's like 99.7 miles on my odometer out there in the car. I come up, sit in the service, have about 10 minutes of a fellowship, and go home. I haven't gotten to know anybody. We need to address that. And we need to develop some nonviolent actions. Learn how to address what's going on in the world. Why Aaron and I get involved in nonviolence? What's happening that's drawing us into that when we could be given that directly to the church? There's a lot going on in the world that we need to address nonviolently. So let us learn how to do that. And the good news as Baptists, we do not have to wait until we call a new pastor. We need to know who we are before we bring in somebody to lead us. Simply put, we need to renew the church so that it fits for the people. Our hymn of response this morning, The Church of Christ in Every Age, hymn number 475.